World Brief and a review of some headlines. But let's start off with the World Brief and tell you what's happening around the world. Now, Archewell Foundation, which is the charity founded by Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, they've stopped donations to a Muslim women's organisation based in the United States after the organisation's founder called for a Gaza ceasefire and denounced Israel's war. Archewell reportedly said it has zero tolerance for hateful words, actions or propaganda, and cut ties with the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition after they became aware of Janan Najib, who we see there, her online post in the Wisconsin Muslim Journal, where she called for an end to the arming of the apartheid state of Israel and called for a free Palestine from the river to the sea, a phrase used globally since the 1960s, calling for an end to the occupation and justice for all Palestinians within the borders of historic Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, tax returns reveal that the Archewell Foundation donated $27,960 to Najib's charity in 2023 alone. And the website also states that they did receive a donation from the Archewell Foundation in 2024. Moving on now, a man has hijacked a small plane in the Central American nation of Belize and stabbed 2 passengers and a pilot before being shot and killed by one of the stabbed passengers. Now, the Tropic airplane was traveling from Corozal to the popular tourist destination of San Pedro with 14 passengers and 2 crew members on board when it was hijacked. The Cessna caravan circled in random directions for nearly 2 hours and was followed by a police helicopter before it touched down, as we see here, at an airport in the coastal town of Ladyville. Now, authorities in Belize declared a full emergency when the incident began around 8:30 a.m. local time, according to the Belize Airport Concession Company. Now, the Belize Police Commissioner Chester Williams identified the hijacker as Akinyela Taylor and said that he was a U.S. military veteran, but U.S. officials did not confirm that detail. Finally, the International Court of Justice will rule in the next few weeks on whether the United Arab Emirates can be plausibly found complicit in the commission of genocide by arming the Rapid Support Forces militia in Sudan's civil war. The case was brought by Sudan, whose acting Justice Minister, Mouaya Osman, told the World Court that The Hague, essentially, last week that the country's ongoing genocide would not be possible without the complicity of the United Arab Emirates, including the shipment of arms to the RSF. Now, Sudan wants the ICJ judges to force the United Arab Emirates to stop its alleged support for the RSF and make full reparations, including compensation to victims of the war. Now, responding to that, the UAE, and representing the UAE, Reem Khatate, who's a top foreign ministry official, told the court that the idea that UAE is somehow the driver of this reprehensible conflict in Sudan could not be further from the truth. This case is the most recent iteration of the applicant's misuse of our international institutions as a stage from which to attack the UAE. Sudan's allegations were at best misleading and at worst pure fabrications. That's what the lawyer for the United Arab Emirates had to say. So those are your stories from around the world.
Well, I mean, we've seen that at best the ICJ has become a great place for conversation and for amplifying advocacy. But beyond that, there's not much the ICJ can do. So even if they are to move forward with this trial, compile the evidence and even convict the UAE and identify certain personalities, we've already seen from what's happening with Benjamin Netanyahu, with Vladimir Putin, that there's no consequences unless the member countries who are all party to, is it the Rome, I believe it's the Rome Declaration, right?
No. The Rome Statutes.
The Rome Statutes, excuse me. With the International Criminal Court. So at the end of the day, what powers do they have to implement? So if they call it a genocide, what is the consequence around it beyond just the negative press that will be associated with the UAE, is my take on that. Now, in related developments, because I do feel it's all related with the Archewell Foundation cutting ties with Najib and her organization. Well, it was a little bit more, so they feel it's an innuendo. When you write from the sea to the river, Palestine will live forever, is what they believe is a popular slogan that calls for the end of Israel as a state. So that in itself is sensitive. But I think for me what this highlights is the fact that there's a growing intolerance globally for anybody who stands against Israel. We've already seen how protesters are being treated. Students, from top institutions in the United States are being deported because they decide to protest in favor of Palestine and against Israel. So for me, it's very concerning to see this growing sentiment around the fact that there's zero tolerance to anybody who opposes the position of Israel. There's also popular sentiment that says that the reason why the relationship between South Africa and the United States has actually deteriorated is not about the Caucasian farmers and alleged atrocities towards them. They say it's because South Africa was bold enough to take this similar case to the International Court of Justice against Israel, and that they're currently being punished for that. So this growing anti-tolerance against those people are free to speak against Israel, just as they are free to condemn any other incident that happens in the world that they feel is an act of injustice. Yes. And, well, the Archwell Foundation separating themselves from this, will they end up on the right side of history is the question. But it's just unfortunate to see this growing sentiment of anti-tolerance towards anybody who decides to speak out against Israel specifically and Israel's role in what's currently happening in that crisis.
Okay, let me deal first with the issue of the International Court of Justice, established in 1945. As one of those United Nations organs that emerged after World War II. Now, the major problem is that the job of the ICJ is to address disputes between nations, as different from the ICC, formed under the Rome Statute that deals with genocide, crimes against humanity, and all of that. This is about conflict between states. And we have had cases, Tunisia versus Libya, USA versus Canada, US versus Iran, DRC versus Uganda, and then the most recent one, Ukraine versus Russia. What the Ukraine versus Russia case tells us, in international law, is about the challenge of the enforceability of the rules of the ICJ, because when the ICJ rules or writes an opinion, it's supposed to be binding on the member states. But we have seen in Ukraine versus Russia that there's a problem here. And this problem is also likely to arise with regard to this issue involving the UAE, Sudan versus UAE. Now, when the UAE signed up to the convention, the International Court of Justice, rule, in, when was this? 1980, right? Oh, no, 2008. 2008. They put a clause there that the resolutions of the ICJ involving, conflict between the UAE and other countries will not be binding. So the major problem we have now in this matter before the ICJ is how would the ICJ now circumvent that clause that the UAE put in their signing up to the convention in this regard. The second issue is what we saw last week in London when there was a meeting of the Arab states in London to address the Sudan problem. They couldn't come up with a communique. They couldn't agree on a consensus. They couldn't sign an agreement, which means that the issue is perhaps beyond the ICJ. It's perhaps a regional issue. And within the region is where you have the issue. Egypt, UAE, all of them having their major interests. What is the major interest of the UAE? UAE has denied that it's involved in any kind of complicity in the crisis in the Darfur region or in the whole of Sudan. But the truth of the matter is that the UAE is trying to prevent the spread of political Islam, particularly by Saudi Arabia. And they are also interested in the natural resources in Sudan. However, the matter is before the ICJ. It will provide its rulings, but will his own ruling be enforceable? That's the question. The other issue with the foundation by the successes, a for-profit, not-for-profit, NGO, that was established in 2020. Yes. The major issue here is about ideology and the hypocrisy of the Western world. They've been sponsoring that Muslim Women's Conference in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Yes. Since the establishment of that foundation 4 years ago. But now the leader of that group makes a statement about Israel that is anti-Israel.
By the way, in 2024 February, she wrote that article.
Yeah. So now they say, "Oh, we have discovered this. We will no longer give you funding." This again is an indication of the hypocrisy of the West when it comes to Israel and the atrocities that Israel is committing. But it's unfortunate that this is coming from the Archwell Foundation, led by Prince Harry.
Yes.
And his wife. And this is coming on the back of the other crisis,
yes.
in Southern and Eastern Africa, this Sente Bale
yes.
Foundation. Agreed. So where ideology stands in the way of profit or humanitarian effort, So it's about the hypocrisy of all of these constructs in international relations.
Thank you. Exactly that. Well, let's move on to newspaper headlines across Nigeria. Let's start with this day. At this day, far be it for any of us to assume that the president, while he's on his extended break, was watching What's Trending with Odiokwe yesterday. But we do know that today, this day does lead with the presidency confirming that President Tinubu is fully involved in governance despite his foreign travel. Now, the president is reportedly now in London and will resume work after the Easter holiday. But in the meantime, he is still in touch with top government officials and giving directions to service chiefs. So still doing the work of the president, even though he's not in the country. Moving on to the New Telegraph, though, it highlights some weaknesses in the power industry that they may continue to be on the cards, as today's New Telegraph leads with the prospect of a tariff hike, as the federal government says this 200 million naira monthly subsidy is not sustainable. Meanwhile, the Punch says the federal government is set to inject 1,900 megawatts of solar power into the grid, as the federal government sets a target of 8,000 megawatts by 2027 and taps the private sector for grid expansion. Dr. Rubin says that is a fallacy, though. Moving on to The Guardian, and it tackles a very interesting topic, which is asking whether artificial intelligence is a threat or opportunity to education. Now, schools and teachers are citing concerns over academic integrity, with so many students defaulting to using artificial intelligence for their work. Now, the Daily Independent features suspended Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan, who has asked the Inspector General of Police to reinstate her security detail after an attack on her family home. And then the Daily Sun leads with renewed tensions in Plateau State as herdsmen allege the poisoning of cows in Bassa. Now, the president of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, has also called on African nations to end the practice of exporting raw materials, and instead what they should be doing, he says, is building a sustainable system, a suitable system that will deepen manufacturing. Finally, the Vanguard leads with a special report on how bandits and killer herdsmen have impacted the farming food supply in Nigeria.
So many important stories. I know we don't have a lot of time, but incident in Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan's family home is despicable, and I think it's important that her security apparatus be restored.
Yes.
Of course, we don't know the motive. The attack happened around 1 a.m. Some hoodlums who had both guns and cutlasses broke in and ransacked the place. But that is scary, and in light of that, we can't expose anybody to such level of insecurity. So I hope that her security that was taken as part of her suspension will be reinstated. And then very lastly, a quick comment on the state of food supply and where we're going with food security is something we've been touching on with regards to the insecurity, all of the incidents that are happening with insurgency, especially Benue State and Plateau State, something we really need to keep an eye on.
Okay, very quickly. The story you brought about artificial intelligence. Yes. On this program, we have had Mr. Sonny Roche, who is an artificial intelligence expert, coming on the morning show to talk about the importance of artificial intelligence. And the conclusion is that, look, it's also the future, in the same way in which, the internet was the future at a particular time. But there is a lot of concern about artificial intelligence and its discontents. Now, my wife Kiki and I, we were discussing this incidentally this morning. And our conclusion is that, look, artificial intelligence, why it expands technology and all of that, the question raised in that newspaper report about academic integrity is very important. Because look, with artificial intelligence, everybody now has become very intelligent.
Yes.
We Google, everybody pretends to have knowledge, even when they are village idiots. You know, they can Google anything and say this. But when you really subject them to the real test of it, you see that these people don't know what they claim they know. So when you do research, you do artificial intelligence, you know, you claim all kinds of things that you have plagiarized. When you are asked critical questions, you just discover that this person is just an empty shell.
This is my thing. So I've never been to a university in Nigeria, so I don't know what the standards are. But for example, when I was in university, when you submitted an essay, for example, before your professor actually achieves it, it has to go through this scanning process where it identifies any plagiarism. So is that also something that we see at Nigerian universities, or is that a loophole?
Excellent point, which was where I was going. The capacity of academics in Nigeria, you know, does not quite provide for what you are describing. We need to train our tutors to be able to spot, you know, this omission in terms of the training of students, so that you don't just produce Google-dependent, you know, intellectual eunuchs who do not have the basic knowledge and who cannot defend their certificates. 20 years ago, it was terrible. The kind of graduates that were being produced, we had to retrain them. Media houses had to establish training departments. Now it will be worse in the age of artificial intelligence and the supremacy of a Google. You will have on screen, you will have in the newspaper houses, intellectual eunuchs, village idiots who know next to nothing.
All right.
This is the major risk.
All right, Adefemi, thank you so much.